All right, so I always like to begin by telling you that this webinar is being brought to you by IP Video Talk. The platform that this webinar is being held on is Grandstream's own in-house developed IP Video Talk video, audio, and web conferencing platform. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. I'm sure many of you have attended our own webinars in the past. So you're used to IP Video Talk. IP Video Talk is, as I mentioned, something we developed in-house. Was originally developed to offer a true cloud plug-and-play platform for our GVC series of video conferencing devices. And we have really grown it into, in my opinion, one of the more comprehensive web meeting or web collaboration platforms out there. Gives you the ability to hold web meetings or video conferences or webinars that can be attended from Grandstream's GVC devices in any location by web users in any location just by joining from a PC or computer, as well as mobile users anywhere in the world by joining with IP Video Talk's Android or iOS app. Also offers a variety of call-in numbers, really just allows you to hold conferences and collaboration meeting sessions that can be joined by anyone from anywhere at any time with just a click of the mouse. So head on over to ipvideotalk.com to learn more and sign up. We're always offering free trials, so you can sign up for a 3-month free trial without even giving any payment information to test it out. So head on over to ipvideotalk.com to learn more and sign up. All right, so obviously we're here today to talk about our UCM series of IP PBXs. These devices were launched in June of 2013, June or July of 2013, and over the last 4.5 years have become one of the most popular and best-selling on-premise IP PBXs anywhere in the world. The reason why we got into the on-premise IP PBX marketplace to begin with is we took a look at the market back in 2011, 2012, 2013, and really saw that most of the really advanced PBX options out there, whether they be on-premise or hosted, were really geared toward large enterprises. They were extremely expensive plans that required you to basically go through a menu and add a bunch of different features that you want, each which had its own cost. A lot of licensing fees involved, a lot of annual fees involved. If you wanted to add a user, you had to pay for that. And largely, it was a really complicated system that was very hard to manage, to update, to maintain, to expand going forward, etc. And so we looked to solve all of those issues, and we believe we did with this UCM series. It offers a compact, easy to manage, enterprise-grade, unified communication manager. You see the UCM acronym stands for Unified Communications Manager. This is not just a voice server. I know traditionally people think of a PBX as being just for voice. This is the whole UCM series is a fully functioning voice, video, data, and mobility manager or server, whichever word that you want to use. We've seen these devices used in a wide variety of ways, from being a fully functional, unified communication manager to a business, to serving as a local backup option for those that might use cloud or hosted platforms, to even just being a device used to facilitate surveillance networks or video facility access networks. Lots of different uses for these devices. The devices that you see here on the screen are our UCM 61 and 6200 series devices. These are, later on, I'll tell you about our UCM 6510. That's the more higher capacity model, more enterprise grade in terms of the capacity that it offers. These devices are really geared toward, or this UCM 61 and 6200 series, really geared and are ideal for small to medium-sized businesses. These devices support either 500 up to 500 users, or in the case of the 6208, up to 800 users. Really ideal for small to medium-sized businesses. Variety of FXO ports, variety of concurrent calls. Those are pretty much the only ways these models differentiate. Other than that, they're all going to offer you full voice, video, data, and mobility support. All of our UCM devices are based on the Asterisk platform, one of the most popular and stable PBX softwares in the world. And essentially what we have done is wrapped our own user interface around it to give it a very familiar Grandstream look and feel. And one of the things that some of you may have seen already, and if you haven't, you'll see it here today. Our UCM series has just gone through an overhaul in terms of the design of the web user interface. It's all the same features and the same functionalities, and it's pretty much, organized in the same way. We just came up with a much more eye-friendly, attractive, easy to use, and easy to maneuver user interface. So if you haven't seen it, you'll see that here today. All right, so in terms of the 61 and the 6200 series models, again, all of those high-end enterprise-grade features packaged in an affordable, compact, easy-to-manage PBX. One of the best things about all of these UCM devices is the fact that they do not charge licensing fees. You will never get charged licensing fees by Grandstream. You get the full functionality of the device, including all future firmware and software upgrades at simply the upfront purchase price. So you get access to every feature and every functionality we can possibly give you, and you get access to everything that we're going to add in the future. And I'll touch on some of the recent updates just to give you an idea of that later on, all for just the one-time upfront purchase price. So basically all of the hardware and software is included for the lifetime of the product. For those of you that are really familiar with the 61 or the 6200 series, the 6200 series we launched just over a year ago. It is the continuation of the 6100 series. The 6100 series, which is still available through distribution, basically the chip that was running on those devices was no longer being made by the manufacturer. We had to replace it with a different chip. In most cases, from the manufacturer side, it's just easier to give it a completely different product name. So that's what we did, but the features, the functionality, the capacity of the 6100 series versus the 6200 series is virtually exactly the same web user interface. They share firmware, so we will always be coming out with new firmware and firmware upgrades that work with both of those models, and they always will. If you are looking for a little bit of an enhanced model, the 6208 I would call your attention to. That has been enhanced versus the other 61 and 6200 series models to offer you up to 800 SIP devices, registration users, whatever you want to call it. All of the other UCM 61 and 6200 series models will give you up to 500. Right below the SIP devices, you see the concurrent calls, which somewhat differs. 30, 45, 60, or up to 100 on the 6208. So there's another way the 6208's been enhanced a little bit. If you are looking for something that has a built-in DHCP server, which I know makes installations and provisioning a lot easier, all 6200 series models have a built-in DHCP server. All of the 6200 series models also support switched dual network or router mode, where on the 6100 series only the 6102 offers that. 6102 and all 6200 series models also have built-in firewalls. So that's a quick little introduction to the UCM 6100 series and UCM 6200 series. And now I'm going to tell you about the higher capacity model that we offer, the UCM 6510. This really takes the exact same user interface, features, functionality of the 61 and the 6200 series and just puts it in a model that offers higher capacity support for more networks. So the three things you see here on the screen are the main ways that the 6510 is different than the 61 and the 6200 series. Number one, it supports more users, supports up to 2,000 users. So if you're really looking to support a lot of users, small to medium-sized enterprises, multiple, centralized PBX that might be controlling a bunch of remote locations around the globe for a business, something like that, 6510 is a great option. Because of its support for more users, up to 2,000. Also gives you more concurrent calls, up to 200, which is double any other UCM model. It also supports E1, T1, and or J1 networks. So if you're looking to integrate or use E1, T1, or J1 networks, 6510 is what you want. And as I mentioned, pretty much other than that, all of the same features and functionality of the other UCM devices that I already explained to you. Same way, it gives you all those high-end enterprise-grade features. Every feature and functionality we can give you at just a one-time upfront purchase price with no licensing fees at any point in time. Free firmware and software upgrades for the lifetime of the product. So again, all hardware and software included for the lifetime of the product. To kind of end or to begin to wrap up my introduction here, one of the things that I always like to call out and call attention to is zero config. One thing I'll say up front, the screenshot you see here is from the old web user interface. You'll see the new one today. Zero config is one of the best features about our UCM series of PBXs. What this allows you to do is basically set up and provision Grandstream, hundreds or even thousands of Grandstream devices with a couple of clicks of the mouse very quickly. Zero config allows the UCM to auto-discover any Grandstream endpoint on the same network as the UCM, and then you can allow it to basically zero configurate all of those devices, essentially the devices automatically configuring all of the Grandstream devices on the same network as it. It can do that on its own. You can provide a set of extension ranges and basic information to base its automatic provisioning on, or you can allow it to do its own thing. And one thing that I'll point out here is this zero config feature is for Grandstream products. It is specifically with Grandstream products. It is not, zero config is not supported by other SIP phones. However, this is just like every product we make. The UCM series are open source IP PBXs. They will support any SIP platform, service, device, etc. That you can integrate with it. This zero config is really just, again, how we optimize the UCM to work and to make it even easier for you to use Grandstream products with it, though we do support any SIP product, service, endpoint that you can possibly find. So last thing here for me, and I mentioned earlier that we are constantly adding features and functionality to these UCM devices, and that those new features are always free simply through firmware software upgrades. Here's an example of 4 things that we've added just within the last 6 to 8 months to kind of show you that these aren't, always just minor updates. We're adding major features that, are specific to vertical industries, or that are, things that a lot of our customers or resellers are asking for. This year we have added integration with property management systems, huge in the hospitality industry. We have specifically certified it with H Mobile, which is a property management system out of Spain, and the Mitel property management system as well. And we've actually also, through those 2 platforms, you can integrate the UCM with Oracle Opera, for example. We just released a case study the other day. You can find it on our website that talks about the UCM being used in a hotel over in Saudi Arabia, integrated with an Oracle Opera property management system with H Mobile, the one that I mentioned earlier, basically facilitating the connection between the UCM and the Oracle Opera platform. We've added integration for CRM, customer relationship management platforms. The 2 main ones are Sugar CRM and Salesforce, so that you can integrate your Grandstream communication system with your CRM platform to share information between the 2, so that your sales staff has all the information they need about callers, and that so when somebody calls in and engages with you, the CRM can make a note of that and integrate that into its own process. We've added a CTI application. It is specifically for most of our IP phones. It allows you to control, hit next slide too early. So the Grandstream Affinity, which you can download from the tools part of our website, is that CTI application. Just allows you to control every feature and functionality of, I believe, it's our 2100 series and 1600 series, hopefully soon to be all the other models. Just on your desktop, make calls, receive calls, change your phone book, forward calls, etc., all from your desktop. We also now support integration with WebRTC. giving you the ability to basically have a WebRTC connection through your UCM to allow people to call into your communication system directly from your website, or from a button in email, or from a button on a social media page or whatnot. Okay, looks like that's it for my introduction. So now we will jump into, I'll turn it over to Abdel, and we'll jump into the technical training part of today's webinar. So just bear with us here for a moment as we transfer control of the presentation to Abdel.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much, Phil, and thanks everyone for watching and joining this webinar. I will be showing you the web interface of the UCM, and I will also be guiding you through certain features and configurations and how to implement the UCM in certain scenarios. So when you log into the UCM for the first time, it just gives you the system status page. The system status, like the dashboard, gives you a lot of information that makes monitoring the UCM very easy. And it gives you some useful information. For example, like the data partition, in case there's no storage on the UCM, and if you are experiencing issues like people are not able to leave voicemails or system is behaving in a different way, just for monitoring the dashboard, you can actually detect and see what could be the cause behind certain issues. The same thing applies to the resource usage, and especially the CPU usage. For example, if you notice that the CPU usage spikes, for example, all the way to 100% or 90%, and there isn't much activity on the UCM, that could indicate that the UCM probably is under some SIP attack. So from the dashboard, you can actually see what is going on the UCM, so you can start troubleshooting and solving the issues. From the dashboard also, you can monitor the external storage devices that are used. For example, I'm not using the USB, it's grayed out, but if I have USB, it would show, for example, it would show like what is the current storage that is used and how much storage is still available on the USB drive. If you notice, I have an SD card plugged into the UCM. There's like 232 megabytes full, and there's some 7 gigs, more than 7 gigs, which is still available. And by the way, for the external storage, like a USB drive or an SD card, you can actually use them for call recording. In case you want to take some note of the UCM, you can just go to the storage resource, and then you can tell the UCM to send all the recordings to whatever device you choose, either a USB drive or an SD card. Some other information that are useful is the status of the ports on the UCM. The ones that are blue, that means I have an SD card plugged in. The USB, since I don't have anyone plugged in, it's showed as grayed out. You can also monitor the FXS port and the FXO port. So once you connect an analog line to the FXO port or FXS, it's going to turn green or amber based on the activity that's on that specific port. You can also monitor the status. I have a SIP trunk here, it's called HQ. You can actually monitor the status, it's registered, and you have the key up here. For example, if it's amber, it just tells you busy. If it's red, that means it's rejected or unregistered. Next, you go to the system information. The system information gives you information about the firmware version that is running on the UCM. The firmware version usually is the program version. And just make sure you all the time you run the latest version. And before you upgrade to the latest version, make sure also you read the release note that is related to that specific firmware version. If you would like to upload the latest firmware version, you can just go to Grandstream website, and then you can go to support, and then go to firmware, and then select the model that you have. This page includes actually all the firmware files for all the Grandstream devices, including the routers, access points, and also the PBX. So before downloading the firmware file that you would like to upgrade to, always make sure you read the release note. Active calls, this is where you can monitor the active calls on the UCM. For example, right now I don't have any call, but let me try to initiate a call. But if I initiate a call, you will notice that the active call is going to show you, for example, I'm calling from extension 1005 and I'm calling the number 617-566-9300. You can actually barge into the call. You can hang up the call. For example, if you want to barge into the call, just click on this one, then put your extension where you want to send the call to, and then you have three options, whether you want to listen to the phone call, or you just want to whisper, or just barge into the call so you can make it into a conference call. So this should only be provided to the supervisor or the engineer or the admin that is monitoring the UCM. So next, under extension and trunk, this is where we start the configuration of the UCM. The first thing, of course, before you start configuring the UCM, the first thing that you need to do is create extensions. So just click on extensions. As you can see, I have a few extensions created already. If you would like to create extensions, just click on add. Then the UCM is going to ask you what type of extensions you would like to use. If you would like SIP extensions for IP phones, just choose SIP extensions. If you would like to use, for example, an extension for an analog device, let's say you still have some legacy analog phones that you would like to assign them extensions, you can also check FXS extension. So when you choose, for example, SIP extensions for IP phones, you have the option to create one extension at a time, or you can create a batch of extensions. Then you just specify the number of extensions that you would like to create. For us, for example, I'm going to be creating 20 extensions, and I would like the range to start, let's say, from 1100. The permission level is useful because you're going to need it when you configure the outbound routes. When you configure the outbound route, you assign it a certain privilege level. And for specific extension to make outbound calls through a specific outbound route, the privilege level of the extension should be equal or higher than the outbound route privilege, so that that extension can make calls. For example, if the extension has a lower privilege than the one configured at the outbound route level, that extension will not be able to use this outbound route to make outbound calls. The SIP password, you can actually assign it one SIP password, and all the extensions, they're going to share the same SIP password. If you would like the UCM, for example, to generate random passwords, which means when the UCM creates 20 extensions and you would like the UCM to have, each extension to have its own SIP password, you can just enter the R. This way you just tell the UCM generate random passwords for each extension. Then you have some other features like voicemail, the password associated with voicemail, then the keep alive. So let me go back here, choose single. You can also configure the voicemail to email, whether you want to set it to yes or no. Then you can configure the email and the email address. For example, if you include your email address and your name. So once that extension, let's say extension 1100, receives a voicemail, the UCM will automatically send a copy of that voicemail to the email configured for that specific extension. You can also configure passwords for users so that they can log in into the UCM. And the username for example, Steve, it's going to be the username is going to be the extension number, and the login password is going to be whatever password you configure under the user password. So when Steve logs into the web UI of the UCM, he's not going to have access to all the stuff that we see right now. He can only have access to his own files, for example, his voicemails, his recordings, his extension settings, and have also access to the feature to send faxes from the UCM. Then under Media, we have some options. Oh, let me just put in the password in here. Then when you go to Media, Media includes some SIP settings, for example, the DTMF method that you would like that extension to use. The DTMF method, the type, or probably the time when you're going to need to change that one is, for example, when you call, when you use the UCM with a third-party phone, and they're using, for example, DTMF mode in band. That specific phone is going to have problem, like, for example, when you call the auto attendant, then it tells you press 1 for marketing, press 1 for sales. So when you press 1 and you see that nothing happens, that could be related to a mismatch in the DTMF mode. Then you have the option where you can choose the codecs in case you would like to use a different codec than the default one, which is the PCMU or G711 ULAW. For a better quality, I would suggest to use the G722, which provides HD quality, especially all our phones are HD. So you're going to get a better audio quality than PCMU or G711 ULAW. There is here an option. It's called strategy. This is a very useful. It's actually a security option that you can implement on the UCM. As you know, when you have the UCM accessible from the public network, people can actually send SIP registrations to the UCM so they can register ROG extensions, and they use this by doing a brute force. So if you would like to add another layer of security to the UCM, you can, especially let's say all the extensions are registered behind the subnet, you can actually tell the UCM only allow SIP registrations coming from that specific subnet. By that, I mean, even if someone is trying to register from outside and they have the right SIP credentials, the UCM is not going to allow them to register because the SIP registration is not coming from that specific subnet. So this is one of the useful features on the UCM that will add more security to your UCM. Next, the feature tab. This is where you configure basically the call features like unconditional call forwarding when busy, call forwarding when unavailable. You can actually do it based on a time. You can just go to the time condition and you can specify the time. For example, during out of office time, you can actually tell the UCM if somebody calls that extension to forward your call to a different extension. For example, if your extension is 1100, you can actually tell the UCM out of business time, just forward all my calls to extension 2001. And the same thing for no attendant or when busy. This is a nice feature also. We call it ring simultaneously. This is useful for people who, for example, who work in the office, but they like to move a lot. So they don't stay in the office, but they still want to receive calls on their phone. You can actually tell the UCM to ring that specific extension together with the external number. And you can do that based on a time condition. You can tell the UCM, for example, during office time, when someone rings my extension, I want you to ring my cell phone too. So in case you're not in office, you can still receive the call on your extension. On your cell phone. Some other options like the ring timeout, it's blank. By default, the UCM uses 60 seconds, which means if someone calls your phone is going to ring for a minute. If nobody picks up, then it's going to hang up, disconnect, or just go to voicemail, depending how you have it configured. You can also enable auto record for that specific extension. You can change the music on hold. You can assign, for example, right here, I have the default music on hold class, and then I have another one that I created. You can actually choose different music on hold classes and assign them to different or to specific extensions. So, for example, when extension 1100 puts someone on hold, it's going to play the music on hold from the Dexter music on hold class. Specific time is related to that option that you have under the call forwarding. So when you choose specific time, you can actually just go back here and then create a specific time that you would like if it does not apply to your office time. So I'm just going to save. So I have few extensions created here. So you have two options. So when you create the extensions and you want to register the phones to your to the UCM using these extensions, you have two options. You have the manual one, which means you can just go and connect to a specific phone, like the web UI of a phone. Then you can create the extension manually on each phone. For example, I'm just going to use account 3. Then I'm going to assign it extension 1100. Then enter the IP address of your UCM. And then the SIP user ID again. By the way, the account name, it could be anything. For example, if this is Steve, you can just include Steve in there, and then you can include the extension number if you would like to. So the account name is optional. You can configure it the way you want. So when it comes to authenticate password, that's what you need to go to get from the UCM. So I'm just going to copy this SIP password and just come here to authenticate password and paste it, save and apply. Then let's go back and see. And then registration has completed. This is one way of doing it. But if you have, dozens of phones or sometimes hundreds of phones, it's not practical to go to each phone and just do manual configuration. For that purpose, the UCM, as Phil mentioned earlier, has zero config, which is a very nice feature that makes your provision and your management of your SIP endpoints way, way easier. Zero config, by default, it's enabled. And a couple of things about the zero config. Zero config works only for devices that are located in the same subnet as the UCM. And it works only with Grandstream devices, which means you can't use zero config to provision third-party devices. So for example, right here, you can see that the UCM actually can detect the phones that are in your network. So I have only one phone that I'm using for this webinar, and you can see that the UCM already detected that phone. You can just click on edit. So I'm using 2135, so you can just choose the model. Then you can start doing all your configuration. Some of the configurations or the features are not available from zero config. Let's say, for example, you have a feature that you looked for under zero config settings, but you couldn't find it here. That's very simple. If that's the case, just go to Grandstream website and then go to Tools, and then you can go to the configuration template. So once you have the configuration template, just go and select the phone that you would like to provision. For example, I'm using 2100. This template has all the features and their matching P codes. I'm going to give you an example here. Let me just scroll down. Let's say, for example, you would like to disable call waiting. it gives you information. It tells you, for example, disable call waiting feature. The P code for that feature is P186. It tells you if you want to set it to no, enter the value 0. If you want to set it to yes, enter the value 1. For example, I would like to I would like to enable, which means have call waiting tone disabled. So I'm going to use yes, which is 1. So I'm just going to go back to the UCM. Then I'm going to use the add new field feature. So I'm going to paste the P code. So we said we want it to be set to yes. So yes is equal 1. So just go to that template. Any feature that's available on the phone, you're going to find it in those templates. Zero config doesn't have all the features. It has most of the features, but it doesn't have all of them. So just save and apply. So when you make your changes, just make sure you save and then you apply changes, and then you come under options and you click on updates. So when you press updates, actually the UCM is going to send a notify message to the phone so that the phone can query the XML config file so that it can get provisioned. That takes probably less than 5 seconds for the provisioning to complete successfully. As you may notice, the zero config has some templates like the global policy, then the global templates, then the model templates. Let's say you have 20 of the 2135 and you would like to configure, let's say, the VMP case 3 and 4 with call parking. I mean, going to each device is not really practical. That's going to take a lot of time. You can actually create a model template and just call it call park. Just put any description, it doesn't matter. Then you have the option. When you set the default model to templates, that means any phone that is 2135, when it boots up, the UCM is going to provision that template to that phone. Or you can create the template and set it as active. And then you can go to the device configuration and you can choose the phones that you would like them, for example, to use that specific template. For example, I have created that template. It's active, but it's not default. If you would like to choose that template, just click on the device configuration and then go to model template. Then all the templates that you created, they're going to be available right here. For example, if you would like to choose that one, select it and then click plus so that the UCM can apply that model template to that specific device configuration. And another information about zero config has hierarchical design, which means when you have one setting configured, for example, at the device configuration, global policy, and global template and model template, those same settings, they're going to be conflicting. So one of them needs to override the other one. So by default, from top to bottom, zero config, whatever you configure at the device configuration has the highest priority, which means if you have something configured at the model template, but you go to the device configuration and you make the changes there, whatever you make at the device configuration is going to override the model template. The second in the hierarchy is the model templates. The third one is the global templates, and the last one, or with the least priority, is the global policy. Sometimes when you want to go and create a model template, especially if your UCM is running an old firmware and then the Grandstream came up with a new phone, you might not find it in the model templates. So if that's the case, just go to model updates. The model updates has all the latest updates of all the templates. So if you don't have it under model templates, just go to model updates, look for the one that you would like to upload to the UCM, and just click on download and install. So we talked about provision the phones. Now you have your phones registered. Of course, you want to go back and start configuring the call routing. For call routing, you need to have some trunks. The UCM gives you the option to use analog trunks or VoIP trunks. In case you would like to use analog trunks, just click on analog. Then For this webinar, I'm using 6202, so it's only giving me 2 channels, 1 and 2. You can combine all the channels in one trunk, or you can create a trunk for each channel. That's up to you and how you would like to implement it. And just give it a name. You can give it any name based on how you would like to configure it. Then save and apply. Most of the time, those settings that you have on the UCM by default, they don't match. Like these settings, for example, the current disconnect threshold with the 200 milliseconds, these are the settings of the FXO ports. Sometimes the analog line that is coming from the CEO has different parameters. When there is a big mismatch, you might experience some issues like calls not ringing the UCM because there's not enough voltage, or calls are not disconnected properly. If that's the case, the UCM just makes it so easy for you. Just plug the analog line and just go to detect. The UCM has a detect tool. So when you go to the detect tool, you can choose, for example, semi-auto detect, choose the channel that you would like to detect, and then you can actually enter your cell phone number. And then click on detect. So when you click on detect, the UCM is going to call your cell phone. Then there are like 4 steps that you need to follow. The UCM is going to tell you actually what to do. So when you complete the detect process, the UCM is going to detect the parameters of the line, the POTS line that is coming from the CEO, and it's going to update all these settings with the parameters detected. So this is for analog trunks. In case you're using SIP trunks, as you can see, I have one created here. We can go ahead and create another one. So for SIP trunk, the UCM gives you 2 options. Create a peer SIP trunk, or you can create a register SIP trunk. The peer SIP trunk is peer-to-peer connection. This is useful, especially when you have, for example, 2 UCMs and you would like to connect them together so that people from UCM A can call people on UCM B. For that case, you can create a peer SIP trunk, and then just, for example, if we have that UCM in Chicago, you can name it Chicago and just enter the public IP address or the VPN IP address of that remote UCM. This way you can create a peer-to-peer connection between these 2 UCMs. Most of the SIP carriers, they're going to ask you to use the SIP register trunk. The SIP register trunk requires the use of a SIP username and a SIP password so that this device, I mean the UCM, can register to the SIP server of your carrier. So if that's the case, just choose register, give it a name, then enter the public IP address or the domain name of your carrier. Let's say, for example, by default, most of the SIP carriers, they use port 5060. So in case your carrier is using a different port, let's say, for example, 5072, just enter colon plus the port number that they're using for SIP traffic. Then at the bottom, you have some options, like keep original caller ID. So when you create the trunk and then you create the extensions, so when you configure, for example, call forwarding at the trunk level, let's say someone calls your UCM and then you tell the UCM to forward the call to an external number. If you have that one unchecked, what's going to happen when you receive the call, for example, on an external number forwarded by the UCM, you're actually going to see the caller ID of the UCM. In case you would like to keep the original caller ID that calls in the first place before the UCM forwards the call to your cell phone, just make sure you check the keep original caller ID. Next, we have the keep trunk caller ID. This one has the highest priority. The UCM has different options how you can configure the caller ID. You can do it at the trunk level, you can do it at the extension level, or you can do it with DoD. And we're going to go back to that one after we create the trunk. The one with the highest priority is the keep trunk caller ID, which means whatever you have at the trunk caller ID, that's what the UCM is going to send. If you would like to send a different caller ID, make sure you uncheck that one, and we're going to talk about the other options to send the caller ID. So the caller ID name, you can just enter any name. The username, this is information that the carrier is going to provide for you together with the password for the SIP trunk, and then save and apply. If you would like to record all the calls coming in and out of that trunk, you can check the auto record. So this is the DoD option that I talked about. You can use that one to send different DoDs. Let's say, for example, you have this HQ SIP trunk and your carrier provided you, let's say, with 5 numbers. So you would like, when certain extensions they make outbound calls, you want them to show a different caller ID. So you can, for example, tell the UCM when extension 1100 and 2000 they make an outbound call, show this number as the caller ID number. Then save and apply, and you can create as many as you want, as long as you own those DoD numbers. So after we have the analog trunk, we have the VoIP trunk configured, then we will start configuring the call routing using outbound and inbound routes. To create an outbound route, just give it a name. Like, for example, if you would like to configure that one for national calls, the pattern. If you hover over the pattern tool, it's going to show you the tooltip that has some information about the characters supported in the UCM. For example, N, it means any digit from 2 to 9, X means any digit from 0 to 9, and dot, it's a wildcard, which means match 1 or more characters. If you would like the UCM to allow all the calls, which means you don't want to put any restrictions on the users behind the UCM, you want them to call any number, you can use the wildcard, which is X dot. That means you can dial any number with any range. It could be international, national, 7-digit extension, that's up to you, which means you just make it open for them, which is not recommended. Every time you create your outbound routes, you want to make them more explicit. The more explicit, the better. For example, the UCM, we have 10 digits. If the carrier, for example, they use 11 digits, just create another one at the bottom of the first one, then include 11 digits. So I'm including N. As you can see, N stands for any number from 2 to 9, because in the United States we don't have any number that starts, any 10-digit number that starts with 1. And if you would like to, you can include multiple patterns. For example, if you would like to include 911, I can just add it at the bottom. If you would like to include 411 for some cities, you can actually enter 411. So for the pattern that you can use, just hover over the tooltip, then you're going to have the option so you can read and you can see which pattern, whether it's correct or incorrect. The underscore that I use at the beginning of each pattern, this is just for the UCM to differentiate between different patterns. If you don't put it there, the UCM is going to put it automatically. So when you create the outbound routes, you have the options to, for example, if you have one outbound route, let's say for international calls, you can actually configure it with a password, which means only the people who have the password can actually dial out of this outbound route. You can do it also with the pin group, because I don't have any pin group created. Once I create one, they're going to show up here. So when users, you can actually assign each user a pin number if they want to call out. So if, for example, Steve makes an outbound call, you can actually see it under the CDR. So you can see that Steve made this international outbound route. We talked about the privilege level when I was talking about the extensions. You remember the extensions have their own permission level. So for example, if you assign the extensions national, you would like to assign the outbound route national level. For example, if the extensions, they have national, but the outbound has international, all the extensions, they're not going to be able to use this outbound route. because the outbound route has higher privilege than the one the extensions have. You can also use the enable filter on source caller ID. Let's say you have this outbound route, but you only have few extensions that you would like them to call from this outbound route. You can choose the extensions that you would like them to call from this outbound route. So the ones that are not selected, they're not going to be able to use this outbound route. Then you choose the trunk. Let's say I'm going to use the HQ. The strip option, in some situations, people, when they switch from analog systems to VoIP systems, like people from the analog system, they used to dial in 9 before they can dial international numbers, like stage 2 dialing. If the users are still used to that habit and it's like you just want to keep it convenient for them, you can actually create separate outbound routes, like different one besides the ones that we just created. And you can tell the UCM any number that starts with 9 plus 10 digits, strip the leading digit. So when the UCM receives any number that starts, any 11-digit number that starts with 9, the UCM will automatically remove or strip the leading digit. This is one case. Next, there is the prepend. I'm going to give you an example. For analog lines, usually people for local area calls, they just dial 7 digits. If that is the case and the user, they just say, hey, we would just want to keep dialing 7 digits, you can actually enter a dial plan that includes 7 digits. And you can tell the UCM, whenever you receive a destination number with 7 digits, prepend the local area code, which is 617. That depends on your area. So every time the UCM receives 7 digits, it's going to prepend with 617 and send it to the SIP carrier as a 10-digit number. You can also configure failover. For example, if the HQ SIP trunk is down, you still want the users to have access to make outbound calls. You can choose the analog line, and then you can just make the same configuration and then save and apply. You can also configure the time condition. You can, for example, tell the UCM this outbound route can only be used during office time. If someone tries to dial out of office time, just reject the call. You can also do that. So once you have your configuration set up, just save and apply changes. So this is for outbound. You can also blacklist certain numbers. If your users, for example, they dial the 900 numbers, you can actually include it here. You can just tell the UCM any number that starts with 900, ban this one. And you can include it both ways, with or without 1. You can include as many as you want. You can actually choose by country. For example, if you don't want them to call into Europe, just choose Europe and then select European countries. Then nobody will be able to call any country in Europe. Next is the inbound routes for incoming calls. So I'm just going to create one. The same pattern that we use, for example, if you have multiple DIDs, you can create multiple inbound routes. For example, all calls come into that specific number, you can send them to a specific destination. The destination can be a specific extension. You can send it to voicemail, conference room, voicemail group, IVR, ring group. So you have a lot of options that you can choose from. So I'm just going to choose, for example, extension. Then I'm going to choose extension 1100. Then save and apply. You can also blacklist if someone keeps calling you and you just want to block that person from calling again. You can just add their phone number and then the blacklist number. Or if you have a CSV file with a lot of numbers, you can just simply upload them to the UCM. So this is for the call routing. Next, we move to call features. Call features, this is where we configure conferences, IVRs, ring group, call queues. So we're going to start with the conference. The conference, you can create a conference. Just click on create a conference. It's going to assign extension automatically. Then by default, the conference is public, which means anyone who dials extension 6300 will be able to join the conference. If you would like to make it private, just uncheck that one and include the password for the users and also the password for the admin. And then you have some options here. For example, quiet mode, announce callers. So when someone joins the conference, the UCM is going to tell you Steve joined the conference. That type of information. So save and apply. You can actually, so after you create the conference room, you can actually schedule it, which means you can tell the UCM to call certain extensions to join this conference room at specific date and specific time. Then you can choose the date, the time. For example, if you would like it to happen every Monday at 11, just choose weekly and then set the time. This way, the UCM is going to call those whatever extensions you include under the extension, local extensions right here. So all the extensions that you select for this conference room, the UCM is going to call them automatically at that specific time that you have configured. There is a nice feature which is Google Service Settings. It's very easy to configure that one. For example, if you just would like the conference schedule to sync with your Gmail calendar, you can just enable Google Service Setting. So every time there is a conference schedule on the UCM, you will be able to see it in your Gmail calendar. And then you can access your conference recordings under this tab. Next is the IVR. IVR or auto attendant. Just give it a name. The UCM by default is going to choose an extension for you, and we're going to talk about those extensions, where they come from later. So from the IVR, you can tell the UCM what the users, when they call the IVR, what are they allowed to call. By default, they can call extensions. If you would like them to call the call queue, just make sure you check that one. You can upload your own prompt, which means when you hit the IVR, you can upload your own auto attendance message. So if you would like to upload it, just click on prompt. Then it's going to take us to a different page. Then here you have the option. You can record, for example, if you have an employee with a nice voice, they can record the IVR for the company, which means they can tell thank you for calling, then they can record the whole thing. Then you can use that recording and you can apply it to the IVR. If you have one in a sound file, you can just simply upload it to the UCM, so it can be available under the IVR. Then the key pressing events, these are the options, like when you press 0, what do you want it to do? For example, press 0 to call extension 1100, press 1 to call the voicemail, for example, of extension 2000, and you have up to 11 options. In the IVR, you can actually include an IVR inside another IVR. It's like in some businesses, they tell you for Spanish, press 1, for French, press 2. When you press 1 for Spanish, it takes you to another IVR with Spanish key pressing events. So the same thing, you can do the same thing with the UCM. The UCM allows up to 5 levels of IVRs, which means you can include an IVR inside an IVR up to 5. So this is for the IVR. Next we move to the ring group. The ring group is basically, you tell the UCM if someone calls that extension, you can tell it to ring group of extension instead of ringing only one extension. You have two options. You can make them ring in order, or you can tell the UCM to ring all of them at the same time. Then you have some options. They can listen to music on hold while the phones are ringing, or you can upload your own custom prompts. For example, when people call and they hit the ring group, you can tell them Your call is important to us. Please be patient. That kind of prompt, you can customize it your way and then upload it to the UCM. The paging group, just give it a name and then assign it an extension. And then you have two options with a intercom, two-way, or paging, one-way. Then you can select the extensions. So when you do that, for example, if I select these two extensions, if I pick up a handset, then I dial the extension 6520, the UCM is going to page, is going to intercom these two extensions. For the call queue, the latest version of the UCM, we included some enhancements to the call queue. Now it's like a lightweight call center. Just assign it an extension, then assign it a name. You can call it call queue or main call queue. And then you can give it a strategy. I mean, when people, they call into the call queue, you want all the phones to ring at the same time, or you want them to ring in linear order, or the least recent or fewest calls. So you have a lot of options how you want to configure it. You can upload your music on hold that you would like to assign to the specific call queue. The max queue length. I mean, some options, if you don't know what they mean, just hover over the tooltip and they're going to explain to you what they do exactly. Then there's the option like max wait time by default is 0, which means someone is calling the call queue. That person is going to stay there until someone picks up the call. The advanced setting, this is the nicest where we included some very nice features. It's a virtual queue. Sometimes when you call the UCM, you wait for an agent to pick up your call. The virtual call queue allows you to call into the UCM, and after a specific time, whatever value you have configured in here, the UCM will give you the option to leave your callback number so that the UCM will call you back when there is an agent available without you holding in the call queue. So it's going to keep your spot virtually. You can also enable the position. So every time there's a second caller, that second caller every 20 seconds or every 120 seconds, the UCM is going to tell it, is going to tell that caller your position is number 2 or number 3 in the call queue, that type of information. And then you have some other settings, like for example, if there is no one in the call queue, do you want people to call into the call queue, or you just want the UCM to send the call queue somewhere? So you have a lot of options. Just hover over the tooltip, then it's going to explain to you exactly what that feature does. Speed dial. This is for some people, like they get used to, like, let's say dialing 0 for warehouse, dial 3 for. You can actually do that. You can tell the UCM if someone dials 0, you have from 0 to 9. If someone dials 0, you can tell the UCM to call the specific extension, or you can tell it to page group or to fax or dial by name or call an external number. So you can choose any one from these available options in the drop-down list. DISA is a nice feature. So when you configure DISA, for example, and then you configure it under inbound routes, and let's say you assign it password. So when people, if you configure it as a default destination for incoming calls, so when people call into the UCM, and then it hits the DISA is going to ask you for the PIN number. So when you enter the PIN number, which is, for example, this one, the UCM is going to give you a dial tone so you can dial from the UCM. This is useful for people who want to make, for example, international calls from the UCM instead of using their phones. Then we have here eventless BLF. As you know, the normal BLF, by default, they generate a lot of traffic in your network, because if a phone has 24 BLF configured, that means the phone needs to send 24 subscribe message, then get another 24 200 like 200 OK, it's like it generates a lot of traffic. Event list, what it does, it instead of the phone sending a subscribe message for each extension, the phone is going to send one subscribe message for a group of extensions to save a lot of bandwidth. This is one advantage. The second advantage, if you have two UCMs paired together, like one in Boston and another one in Chicago, you can actually monitor the extensions in Chicago from the phones behind the Boston UCM using event list BLF. If you would like to know how you can configure event list BLF, just go to the Grandstream website. There's actually a guide that explains to you step by step how you can configure the event list BLF. Feature codes, these are the feature codes that are supported by the UCM, and they tell you exactly which one of them does what. You can change them if you want to. For example, if you want to use 81 for paging and you want to use it for a different purpose, you can actually change that value to something else that is not being used by another functionality. Fax T38. In case you have a fax number but you don't have a fax machine to receive, for example, faxes, you can actually use the UCM to receive faxes. So you can just assign, for example, an extension, and you can call it, for example, the main fax number, and then you can associate it with an email address, save and apply. So this extension, when you go to the inbound route and you configure it as a default destination, what happens when there is a fax coming into the UCM is going to send it to that extension, then it's going to receive the fax, convert it into a PDF file, then send it to you as an attachment in the email that you have configured for that specific fax extension. The PBX settings, these are some general information. We talked about the extensions. These are the extensions that are used by default on the UCM. For example, when you create an IVR, the UCM will pick a range of an extension from that range. In case you would like to change it, you can. Let's say your users, they would like to use 3 digits instead of 4 digits, you can actually do that. Just make sure that the extension range that you're using does not conflict with other extensions. Like Call Park, by default, they're using 700 up to 720. So just make sure they're not conflicting, then change them to 3 digits. For example, if you want to switch that one to 7,000, just make sure you change to 700, but it's going to give you a remark telling you this one conflicts with the Call Park. The other option that you have is go to Call Park and change the extension range so it does not conflict with the IVR. This is where you configure the SIP settings. For example, the UDP port for SIP traffic, which is 5060. In case you would like to change it, just change it to a different port. Miscellaneous, these are some type of information like register, timeout. Then you have TCP. In case your carrier supports TCP and you would like to use it, just come here and check or enable TCP. The NAT setting, if your UCM is accessible from outside, you can actually configure the external host name. You can include domain name or public IP address in that box. Then you just come down here and just include the IP address of your local area network. So every time any device behind or sitting in this LAN network, the UCM is going to switch it, let's say, with this public IP address. RTP settings, these are the RTP ports that are used by the UCM. So when there is an RTP, when there is audio traffic, the UCM by default chooses ports from 10,000 to 20,000. You can shrink it if you don't have so many phones. You can just use 10,000 to 12,000. Music on hold, by the default, the UCM comes with the 5 sound files. Let's say if you would like to upload your own files, just create a new music on hold class, give it a name. Let's say this is going to be your main music on hold, save, and just choose the one that we just created and start uploading your files. There are some restrictions to the file that you can upload to the UCM. You can upload MP3, you can upload .wave. Just make sure that the size does not exceed 5 megabytes as the file for the sound file. We talked about that earlier. So if you have, for example, an SD card and a USB drive, you can tell the UCM actually to send all the recordings to the SD card or USB drive. It's up to you. System settings, like HTTP server. This is, for example, if you notice, when I first logged into the UCM, I just typed in the IP address, then the UCM automatically redirected to port 8089 and then HTTPS. I strongly recommend to disable that one. Leave it HTTP, then change the port to a different port in case people they try to do brute force attack on your login page of the UCM. Just by changing the port, you make it a little bit harder, so you add another layer of security. Network settings, as you know, the UCM supports 3 modes. You can use the UCM actually as a router. And I mean by that, you can just put a switch behind the UCM using the LAN port, and then you connect all the phones. Then the UCM will assign them IP addresses from the DHCP service. Or you can use it as a switch, so it can just become like an endpoint within your local area network, or you can use dual. Dual, we use it in case you have, for example, 2 networks in your environment and you have 2 gateways. You can use the UCM as dual so that it can serve both networks. OpenVPN, this is a very nice feature. In case you would like to use an OpenVPN, in case you have, for example, remote phones that you would like them to connect to the UCM using OpenVPN, just enable, put the IP address of the OpenVPN server, then upload the certificates, save, and apply. So when you do that, and if you want to make sure that the connection has established, just go back to system status, then network status, system information, network information. If the OpenVPN connection is established properly, you're actually going to see an OpenVPN with the IP address that was assigned by the OpenVPN server in here. This way you would know that the UCM was able to connect successfully through the OpenVPN. Or you can go to the maintenance and you can use the ping feature, so you can ping devices using the same OpenVPN network. DDNS, in case you have the UCM but you don't have a public IP address, you can actually create a DDNS that you can use to access remotely, or you can use it to allow remote extensions to register to the UCM. So these are the domain names that we support. Some of them are free, some of them you have to pay a certain amount of money. Then you have security settings. You have defense static. For example, if there is an IP that keeps like bothering the UCM, let's say they're using brute force, you can tell the UCM to drop the packets, incoming traffic, and you can tell it from the WAN interface, and then you can customize it. Then you can just include the IP address that keeps like launching the brute force on the UCM. So this is for static defense. There is also fail to ban, which is very useful. Fail to ban is useful against malicious SIP registration, malicious SIP calls from the UCM, and also for malicious subscribe message to the UCM. So when you enable fail to ban, you tell the UCM, if someone tries to register to the UCM, within 10 minutes, block that device for 10 minutes. You can actually set 0, which means if someone tries to log into the UCM 5 times within 10 minutes, the UCM is going to ban that device forever. If you have devices from your local network, And sometimes you have issues like probably the switch keeps losing power and the phones they lose registration, so they have to register more than 5 times per 10 minutes. You can just whitelist your local area network so that the devices internally would not, this rule would not apply to the devices located internally. You can, when you do fail to ban, one thing is that you must enable that one, asterisk service, for the fail to ban to take effect. You can also use LDAP server. The UCM, you can use it as an LDAP server or as an LDAP client. You can actually upload or create LDAP phone books on the UCM and just provision them to the phones, or you can just go ahead to the manual configuration of the phone, then configure it with the LDAP filters and attributes so that they can query the UCM for LDAP contacts. Time setting, this is where you configure your office time, your holiday time. So when we were talking about office time at the outbound route, definitely you have to come here so you can define what is your office time, so that when you go to the inbound route and you tell the UCM, this is our office time, the UCM will know what is your office time. Email settings, by default, MTA is enabled by default. However, there is an issue with MTA. Some carriers, when they see that there is an email coming from the MTA type, they might think it's a spam server, so they're just going to start blocking it. If that's the case, I strongly recommend to use your own email. If you have a Gmail account, under the server, just include the email, the SMTP server of Gmail. For example, I'm using Gmail. So you can include, for example, smtp.gmail.com, colon 58787 for TLS, and then just include your email address and then the password. The display name is optional, as well as the sender name. Save and apply, and then you can start sending your test emails. Next, we're going to jump to CDR before going back to maintenance. CDR gives you information like call, detail, record. You can see the calls that were made, how long they lasted. If you have auto record enabled, you can actually play the recording from the web UI of the UCM. Excuse me. You can actually tell the UCM to download those records and send them to your email based on specific time. Let's say every day at 11 p.m. You can tell the UCM to send you a copy of that CDR to your email so you can see it and analyze it in an Excel spreadsheet. You can also access audio recording files and their CDR recording files. You can play them from here. You can delete them. You can download them, so you can put them on external devices. The UCM also allows you for API configuration, so that information from the CDR can be sent to an API application using the configuration that you have right here. Just include the IP address of the API application, the subnet mask, the port number, then save and apply. This way the UCM is going to send that information to the API application. And the added value features, we talked about zero config. The UCM also has the AMI, or the asterisk management interface. It allows you to get access to the interface. It's not, by the way, it's not full access to the asterisk interface on which the UCM is running. This is only for the port, in case you are using CTI server. CRM, as Phil mentioned earlier, at this moment we support two major ones, Sugar CRM and Salesforce using SOAP, and REST for Salesforce. PMS will support HMobile and Mitel. HMobile is basically PMSI, which is a middleware. The middleware, the HMobile middleware allows you to use the UCM with, if you go to the HMobile website, they actually have a link that includes all the PMS systems that you can use with the HMobile middleware. And this is one of them. It's a long list, so it doesn't mean you have to stick to HMobile. You can actually use the UCM with all these PMS systems because they were compatible with the PMSI or the PMS middleware of HMobile. Wake up service. This is useful in hotels, or some people, they use it as a reminder. For example, if the company, they have a meeting every Monday, they can just simply configure the time, the date, and then they can choose the extension, then select them. So every, let's say, every Monday around, let's say 12:49, the UCM is going to call these extensions, then it's going to play the prompts. The prompt, you can actually record it and then upload it to the wake up service on the UCM. Fax sending. If you have a fax number but you don't have a fax machine, you can actually use the UCM to send faxes. Just enter the number that you would like to send the fax to, and then upload or choose the file like PDF file, then send. Then the UCM is going to send the attachment as a fax attachment. The announcement center. You can create the announcement center, which means just assign it to group, upload the prompt, then give it a code. For example, if I assign this one 55 code, then I call it emergency, for example. Then I can upload the prompt. I don't have anything to upload, or you can click on prompt, then you can start recording your own. Save. So I don't have one, so it's not going to allow me to save. So when you create the code and the prompt for the announcement center, you can create a group of extensions. You can call them, for example, this is emergency, and then I'm going to call the number, this one 666. Then I can select all the extensions. So when I have the announcement center, let's say configured with code 50, and then I have the group 66, just by dialing 50, 66, 66, the UCM is going to call all these extensions in the announcement group, and then it's going to play the prompt that I have uploaded in the announcement center. Next, we're going to finish with the maintenance. This is where you do your troubleshooting. This is for user management. So you can see all the users and their privileges. Change information, like in case you would like to change the password for the login UCM, which is strongly recommended. Just put the new password and just save and apply, and you can bind it to an email address in case you forget it. Operation logs, it gives you information about what happened on the UCM, what changes were made on the UCM. This way it allows you to monitor the UCM in case someone is messing up with your UCM. You can also configure the syslog. If you're having some issues like with hardware related issues, otherwise you can just use the network troubleshooting like an Ethernet capture. It's like Wireshark built into the UCM. This is very useful in case you have IP related issues like SIP traffic or UCM losing registration, or like the calls are dropping while using the SIP trunk. If you have that type of issue, just choose the interface and then start and then replicate the issue. Then the UCM is going to capture all the traffic. Usually when you open a ticket with technical support, you're going to ask you for a trace. So that's going to help us understand what the problem is, and it's also going to help us determine what the cause of the issue is. So if you've ever asked to do that, just go to maintenance, network troubleshooting, choose the interface, start, replicate the issue, stop, then download the trace, and you can attach it to a ticket with a description of what the issue is, so that support engineer can assist you solving the issue. You can also check the system events. By default, only the system crash that is enabled. You can enable as many as you want. So in case there is an event, you're just going to see it under the logs. You can also configure the alert contact, which means if the system crashes, it's going to send an email to, it's going to send the log to whatever email you configured under the super admin email or the admin email. To upgrade the UCM, you can go to maintenance, upgrade. Just go to the Grandstream website, as I showed you earlier, download the firmware file and just unzip it and just upload it to the UCM. It takes probably between 3 to 5 minutes to do the whole upgrade process. You can also back up the system in case you have this UCM and you want to change it to another UCM. You can back up the configuration and restore it on a different UCM. So that's all for today. I tried to cover most of the important features of the UCM. If you have any questions about something that I did not talk about, please feel free to ask the question and we'll be glad to answer them for you.
Awesome, thank you, Abdel. I've got some questions. We didn't go through any of them as we went. I'm sure you answered a bunch of them, so let's see what we got here. Just going back to the beginning, some of these you may have already answered. With fax detection, does it support G711 pass-through or just T38?
It's if you're using, for example, a fax machine connected to the FXS port, you can go to the FXS port. Let me show you right here. The fax is kind of tricky though. So let's say I have a fax machine and it is connected to an FXS port. I can just go to media and tell it, for example, gateway. So when you choose fax mode gateway at the FXS port, you actually using pass-through, which means the UCM is just going to pass the fax tone to the fax machine so that the fax machine can handle the fax traffic. If you don't have that one, or if you have like a fax extension, the UCM will definitely use T38.
All right. SSH, is it for trace options like set debug real time, or is it just a telnet command?
It's just a telnet command. So you can access the SSH and execute certain commands.
How does DID mode work in the inbound route?
Let me go back to the inbound route. So you're definitely talking about this one, the inbound multiple mode. So if you check that one, if you set it to yes, the UCM gives you two options. Let's say, for example, we have the default one configured to ring extension 1100 all the time. We can configure another inbound route and we can send it, for example, to voicemail of 1100, save and apply. So this inbound route is configured with two default destinations. To switch between the two default destinations, you need to use a feature code. So you need to go back here, check that option, and these are the feature codes that you need to use. For example, if a secretary goes into lunchtime, she can actually use mode 2 just by dialing *82. Then the UCM is going to send the call to the voicemail. For example, when she's back from her lunchtime, she can return the inbound route back to extension 1100 just by dialing *61. So you use these two feature codes to switch between the default mode and the mode 1. It's like it's using multiple modes for the same inbound route.
Cool. And just to answer one of the questions that came in through the question and answer panel, this webinar was recorded. The whole thing will be posted to our YouTube channel. I'm going to plan to do that right after this meeting. So if you check in a couple of hours, it should be up on our YouTube channel, which is Grandstream.com, or excuse me, YouTube.com/Grandstream Networks. A bunch of other training webinars up there, including a UCM one from yesterday. All right. Question about if we offer for our call queue any real-time monitoring of the call queue status that's accessible from the web or from the phones or something like that.
The call queue actually has a switchboard that you can use to monitor. It's right here because I don't have, let me configure one quickly. So when you configure, for example, a call queue, you can actually just go to the switchboard and you can start monitoring what is happening with the call queue. For example, the first one, you're going to see the calls that are waiting, and then the calls that are proceeding, and it's going to show you, for example, the extension, which extension is has actually responded to that specific call. Then you will see the agents here at the bottom, and it's going to give you statistic information. For example, extension 1100 answered 3 calls and abandoned 3 calls, and the talk time that he talked during these calls, and it's going to give you the agent status. So from this page you can actually monitor it. If you are the admin, you can have access to all these features. In case you don't want to assign admin privilege to someone, but you want that person, for example, to monitor the call queue, you can actually do that. Just go to call queue, advanced settings, and then enable that option. I'm sorry, not this one. Enable that option. You can, for example, assign Steve with extension 1100 and just check that one. So when you check that box and you choose 1100, when Steve logs in with his credentials like 1100 as user admin and then the user password, Steve will be able actually to have access to his own folders as well as the option to be the chairman of the call queue, which means monitor the call queue, listen to the calls in the call queue. He can hang up the call queue, he can disconnect people, so he have full access to all the call queue features depending on which extension you're going to be using as chairman.
Awesome, thanks. This was a question we got a bunch yesterday. Does the UCM include an open VPN server?
No. The UCM can only work as an OpenVPN client. If you use the UCM, for example, with the Grandstream router, GWN 7000, that one has an OpenVPN server, and then you can simply put the UCM behind it, and then you can have remote phones also configured as OpenVPN, so they all go through the GWN 7000 router as an OpenVPN server.
All right, question from a couple of minutes ago. And we might need more information on this one, can notifications use SMS?
Oh, no, at this moment, no. We can only use emails for now. Yeah, that would be a nice feature, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Looks like we're down to the last couple of questions here. Do we offer load balancing on analog lines?
You can do that. I mean, if you go to the analog lines, for example, you can do load balancing for outgoing calls. For incoming calls, this is something that you have to do at the carrier level, because we don't. It's like the UCM cannot control where the calls should come from. But if you're using it for outgoing calls, you definitely can do that. Just create your analog trunk and then choose, if you have like 4 channels, 8 channels, just choose all of them. So if someone calls out, the UCM is always going to choose using this mode right here. Ascend, descend, or pole, which means choose things randomly. So if line 1 is busy, the UCM will automatically use line 2, 3, 4, and vice versa.
All right. It looks like that's pretty much it in terms of questions. All right, we just got another one. How does fax sending... Well, so the question is, how does fax sending send the faxes? I don't know if that's something...
Yeah, I think I explained that one. For example, when you log into the UCM, go to value added features. This one, by the way, this option is available when users, they log into their web portal on the UCM. So just click on fax, send in, just enter the destination number, and just choose file to upload. So once you upload the file, choose, then the UCM will send it automatically.
Awesome. All right, I think that's it for today. So we will wrap up the webinar with that. As I mentioned, this was recorded. I will upload it to our YouTube page. So check our YouTube page in about an hour and it should be there. YouTube.com/Grandstream Networks. One thing I want to kind of mention real fast before we wrap up here today is some of you probably saw this through emails that you may have gotten from us or social media. We just launched what I guess is our first official training certification platform. We're calling it Grandstream Academy. Basically what it is it takes all of the in-person trainings that we've been doing around the world for the last couple of years, and it creates an official, standardized, structured certification program where you can track your certification, renew it online, take a test to renew it online. From just the Academy, find in-person classes around the world or around your area to update your certification or to get certified on different products or whatnot. So keep an eye out for that. For the moment, that is mainly focused on our in-person trainings. Within the next couple of months, we are actually going to be introducing a lower level of training certification that you'll be able to get from just attending a webinar like this. It's going to be not so much focused on learning how to set things up, but it's more for you know what the various features are, what they do, what the kind of solutions they allow businesses or your customers to offer as a lower level, and then we'll have a higher level which we're calling Grandstream Certified Professional, which will be you'll get from all those in-person training classes. So check that out. Go on over to, I believe it's academy.grandstream.com. Let me double check that.
Yes,
academy.grandstream.com, where you can see the whole list of upcoming trainings, sign up for them, and pretty much get added to our portal. If you have attended a training recently, I believe we're in the process of moving over, if you have attended a training in the last couple of months, basically giving you the certification for that training, though that program wasn't available there. So keep an eye out for more information on that through email, social media, and check it out, academy.grandstream.com. All right, so yeah, that's it for today. Check YouTube a little bit later on for the recording. I want to thank everybody for being with us here today. Hope to see you at another Grandstream webinar soon. As it is Friday, happy Friday to you all, and hope that everybody has a great weekend. Take care.